Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN, and it is another big NFL and college football weekend. We'll be talking about all about the NFL and the college football throughout the show. And joining me live now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Eric Edholm. You can follow him on Twitter at Eric_Edholm. Yahoo Sports covers college football and the NFL. And today, he's actually at Notre Dame for Notre Dame versus Va Tech. Eric, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Ready for a good game here, hopefully.
So I was going to ask you before we get into the other stuff about Notre Dame. I mean, this is a team that most people thought was going to go into Michigan, get another big win, at least keep themselves in the conversation. And now after that loss last week, it really feels like this program is kind of like in purgatory at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's sort of what we question we had in the years past, which was, are these guys, do they deserve to be in the upper tier? And that was not the case not that long ago. So we looked at their defense and saw, all the playmakers there. Cole Kmet comes back at tight end. Ian Book was playing well, and they laid an egg in that game. So it's an important one for them to kind of reassert themselves and show that they can, kind of hang with the big boys a little bit. At 5-2 there, they don't have a bad record. Man, but we're talking about the 16th team in the nation by the polls. Are they that good? That's the question I kind of have heading into this one. And, Virginia Tech has the same record. I think they're playing better than they have before, but I think still some doubt about them. So I think anything short of a convincing victory is going to keep those questions kind of raised a little bit.
Do you feel like Notre Dame at this point is just turning into another one of those schools that has a lot of NFL prospects but can't always put it together to possibly, be as a big-time winner in college football?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, obviously we know the challenges Notre Dame faces with the scheduling, right? I mean, they pretty much have to have a perfect season or a one-loss season, a very good loss, to get into that playoff hunt. I mean, as you pointed out, they've produced some good NFL talent, tight ends, offensive linemen, a couple of receivers here and there, running backs, things like that. But, yeah, you'd like to see it come all together. I mean, I think Brian Kelly is at the point, too, where I wouldn't say he's at a crossroads in his career, but, it's almost like the question of have they reached their peak under Kelly? Some NFL teams have done work on him. They think he has kind of the makeup of an NFL head coach. So, it almost feels like at some point here in the next year or two, if they don't take a significant step, or on the other end, if they kind of have a poor, finish to this season or next year, if they don't do well, I guess it wouldn't be the most stunning thing to see a coaching change. Not that he'd be fired necessarily, but, could maybe see, all right, I've kind of done all that I can do here, but I still have faith this team can do some good things. And, with Jones and Claypool and Kmet and, some of these playmakers, they've got to step up and they've got to have big games. I mean, that's really going to be the biggest difference for them, to be able to put up those explosive plays on offense, I think.
Speaking of NFL talent, and I really wanted to ask you about this because this is a question that I get a lot, and I'm not even saying my answer is the best answer, and that's why I would love some clarity from you. When it comes to the quarterbacks in college right now, the guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert, Jake Fromm, Jake Eason, Jalen Hurts, where do you draw the line at this point? Obviously, the profile is not complete. We have another month of football ahead of us, but where do you draw the line between the guys who are legitimate? This guy can be a Pro Bowl level caliber quarterback, and the guys who, for lack of a better term, are basically, good starters, but they're never going to elevate a football team in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think, the question people are going to have. NFL folks that I've talked to, there's some that really think Tagovailoa's makeup has, NFL written over it. He's poised, he's accurate, he can throw on the run, but there's some questions about, he keeps getting hurt. These ankle injuries keep repeating, and he's got this sort of weird frame, a short frame, and maybe not as athletic as you might think, and that sort of thing. Is he just the product of great talent down there? So that's one question people are asking with him. With Joe Burrow, it's kind of the 1 year thing. All right, he's been terrific at LSU this year, and coming into the season, I probably had him as a 4th or 5th round pick. Now we're talking about 4th or 5th overall, maybe even ahead of Tagovailoa. I mean, who knows? He could be a top 5 selection if he keeps it up, if he has a great game in 2 weeks against Alabama or next week against Alabama. So, I think all those questions apply to the top guy. With Herbert, we have 3.5 years of evidence. I don't know that he's vastly better than he was in 2017. So if you played at kind of the same level for the last year and a half, 2 years, I can understand, as great as his physical traits are, if NFL teams say, boy, there's no ascension. There's no progress forward here. So I think that's going to be his biggest hurdle is, if you stayed in school, you'd like to see those guys take yet another step. I don't know that Herbert has done that. He hasn't gone backward. He certainly hasn't. But how do you justify him going forward? The mystery guy is going to be Jacob Eason, as you mentioned. There's so much physical ability. We don't have a ton of tape on him. And anything he did at Georgia is pretty much wiped out now. And it's basically based on the games that he has this season and whether he opts to come out. He's the one who I could see a team being a little bit more infatuated with him than Herbert and just saying it's almost like the unknown. But that's the risk. That's how you get Trubisky going ahead of Watson and Mahomes. So it's really a kind of a dangerous game of roulette that you end up playing if you play that way.
I'm glad you brought up Trubisky because I was going to ask you, as we're seeing Mitch's season progress and how it feels like he's really taken either a step down or he just hasn't evolved at all. And you also look at Marcus Mariota, he's lost his job in Tennessee to Ryan Tannehill, a guy who actually didn't even play quarterback until the end of his college career. He's a former wide receiver before he got to the NFL. How much do their situations do you think have an impact on NFL evaluators right now when it comes to the current quarterback class?
Yeah, I mean, if we're strictly just starting from the standpoint of fascinating skill set, not that much experience, obviously Mariota played plenty of college football, so it's a little bit different in that regard. But I think there are some similarities to their situations. It's almost like they just leveled out. Now, Mariota's had a couple different head coaches, a few different offensive systems. They've drafted receivers and tight ends in the first, 2-3 rounds. They bolstered that offensive line. They have a big hammer at running back. And he's still been kind of the same guy. Now, is it possible Mariota just needs to get out of Nashville and go, be Phillip Rivers' successor or Trubisky's successor in Chicago or wherever? It's possible. It's not as if he's been a horrible quarterback. He just hasn't been anything more than passable. So I suspect the same thing kind of rules with Trubisky, too, in the sense that, it's going to be awfully hard for him to succeed long-term in Chicago. It's going to take some serious mental fortitude. It's going to take the fans and him kind of moving on from all the bad stuff that's happened to this point. That makes you think, okay, maybe he could go somewhere else and be great if he has a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. But, the evidence is starting to point to the fact that maybe these guys aren't upper tier talents. They're just not those difference makers with the lightning quick processing and the pinpoint accuracy that today's game demands with all the throwing and all the timing that goes on in the passing game now.
Eric Edholm joining me on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at Eric_Edholm. Yahoo Sports, NFL draft covers college football and the NFL. You mentioned the processing speed, and this is something I've brought up before. I think we get so hung up on the physical tools of these guys. I heard Jordan Palmer talk about this a couple of weeks ago. He wants to know, how does a guy handle crisis, right? To me, if you have a guy who can handle crisis and a guy who can process information, to me, that's way more important than the physical skills. Am I oversimplifying that?
Yeah, I think of a guy like Alex Smith or something, and again, I'm a big Alex Smith fan because you know what you're getting with him. And,
right.
I think the floor is a little bit higher than some of those other guys we're talking about. And Alex Smith is probably one of the 5 or 6 smartest quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, he can learn it. I remember talking to Chase Daniel, who spent some time as his backup, and he said, we'd go over a play once in the off season, and he would remember it rote, every single assignment, every protection, every route, everything. Months later, we bust it out in practice, and he'd be teaching it to everybody else without him having to look at it. So, and I think it applies to that. Knowing who your hot read is, knowing where the blitz is coming from, knowing what your protection is, and knowing, every adjustment that could happen on the fly. And that's a big part of it. That's why, NFL evaluators are going to look at those crisis situations and see how they handle, those problems and how they get themselves out of those bad situations and what adjustments are they making. And Can they get to the third read? Those sorts of things. And frankly, I don't think you had to ask Trubisky to do that very much in college. He had a one or two read system, a lot of half field reads. Again, just using him as an example. And that's why Jake Fromm, let's face it, doesn't have a rocket arm, doesn't have a great big tall build. He's not this strapping guy, but prior to two poor games the last two outings, that's all he showed is intangible smarts, quick thinking, all that stuff. So that's why I think some team could easily say, okay, third round physical talent, first round QB brain, and that could be enough for an NFL club.
Before we move away from some of the college guys, I did want to ask you about two more specific prospects. First of all, Chase Young of Ohio State. I see the dude's a beast. I watch what he's doing, but how does he, in your evaluation, compare to the previous former monsters from Ohio State, Nick and Joey Bosa? What is his skill set similar to those guys? Is he better? Is he the same? How do you evaluate him?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of people are going to do that. And obviously, as the Bosas have had, both of them were named, player of the conference or whatever, AFC, NFC Defensive Players of the Week last week. I mean, I think with their successes stacking up and them playing well, NFL teams are going to say, hey, it helps Chase Young. But there are some differences, and I'm glad you asked, because I would say that the Bosas, they're different, a little similar. I would say Joey's a little bit better of an athlete than Nick. Nick is maybe a little bit better of a hand technician. I mean, he's got some of the fastest reactions and handwork that I've seen for a rookie in a long time. But Chase Young may have more explosion, more power, more burst than either of them. And that's saying something. I mean, that really is. I think when Joey Bosa tested at the Combine, I think it was good. I would say it was a good athletic showing. Was it great? Was it rare, elite? I don't think you could say that. Now, Nick, I think might be just a little bit more gifted than his older brother in terms of that stuff. But if you just strictly talk about the physical stuff, I think Chase Young has the advantage. He can carry a little added bulk. He's got a little bit more length, and he's just got that little extra burst and that closing speed that those guys don't quite have. So maybe he could get a little bit better with some of his leverage and things like that. But, I mean, the guy is having a fantastic season. I've had people tell me they think he's maybe even better than Nick, maybe better than Myles Garrett, probably a higher rated prospect than Jadeveon Clowney. We're talking about guys who went first or second in the draft. So unless quarterbacks go 1-2 or somehow 1-2-3, I don't think that's going to happen. I would be stunned if he made it out of the top 3 or 4 picks. I just don't think there's any way that smart, well-run NFL teams are going to let this guy get that beyond that point, because he could be the highest-rated prospect, on either side of the ball in a few years. I mean, he's that well-regarded in NFL circles.
The other prospect I want to ask you about is a guy from our own area. Jonathan Taylor is from down here in South Jersey. What do you think of him as an NFL prospect? We know he's a great runner, but there's been a lot of guys who've come from Wisconsin. There's been a lot of guys that come out of that football program in the last 20 years who put up big numbers, who looked great, but then they get to the NFL, and you want to know, is he Monty Ball or is he somebody else?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, obviously, anytime a school produces a lot of one position, right? Florida wide receivers back in the day, Penn State linebackers, and in this era, it's Wisconsin offensive linemen and running backs. So, yeah, I think it's natural to compare him and say, okay, look, there's no question in my mind he's a better athlete, a better player than Monty Ball. I was shocked Ball went as high as he did back in the day. He's out of football now. He's had some off-the-field issues as well. Melvin Gordon is probably the comp that would come up most readily, but the difference is I think Gordon has better ball security. He may not be the explosive runner that Taylor has proven to be, but Taylor's put some balls on the ground. It's been better this year, but still not great. And I don't know that he's ever going to be a plus factor in the receiving game. I think he's tough enough to throw his nose in there as a pass blocker. He can learn those protections and get better at that and understand how to do it the right way, the NFL way. But he's going to be a running back first and foremost, and I just don't know if that means first round. He's going to test well. We know his His track background, his athletic, template should be really good. Checks a billion boxes as far as what you're looking for in a back. But this day and age, if you're a fumbler and not a great receiver, I know he's caught more passes this year. I still don't know that he's the perfect natural, elite pass catcher at that spot. I wonder, could a team like the Miami Dolphins with multiple picks in round one, use their third first-round pick on him? Absolutely, sure. But you start thinking about the kind of, the number of teams that get in the first round who could actually spend a pick on him. The list seems short. A lot, either they have their star back already or, that they're not the type of team that would do that. So we'll see. I'm fascinated to see where he eventually ends up because he's been so productive, so good, incredibly smart kid. His character is through the roof. It's really the fumbling and the questions in the receiving game that I think could hold him back just a little bit.
Eric Edholm joining us at Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Eric, before I let you go, I did want to ask you about the guy still in the NFL, a guy that, in this area, there's been a lot of debate about him, and that is Carson Wentz. I mean, this is a guy, there's a lot of hype about him coming out of college. He's had the injury issues. You have people in an area they're still the religious Foles followers. They worship at the altar of Nick Foles, and they'll never buy into Carson Wentz until he wins a Super Bowl. What is your perspective on Carson Wentz at this point in his career?
I'm a fan. I really like his style of play. I mean, he's fearless out there. He's tough. He's athletic. He can make throws on the run. He'll give you the willies a little bit when he's kind of running around. It looks like a little, chaotic sometimes. But I feel like beneath that surface, you realize that for the most part, he's playing under control, right? I mean, he is a freewheeler. He does have some throws. The Dallas game was not a good look for him. And I think some of it was his fault. Some of it was his receivers letting him down, things like that. But overall, I've been impressed. Now, you've heard the whispers, though, as you kind of pointed out, though, with Foles. There was such adoration and admiration for him when he was there. Big locker room guy. Everybody loved him. Nick was just sort of a unassuming, low-key guy. His style of leadership isn't going to work for everybody, but he made it work, and he was so good. But, with Carson, I don't necessarily think that means Eagles players dislike the guy, but I think he sort of felt this a little bit insecurity or pressure to kind of be, Foles' successor almost, which is a weird way to think about it. But I don't know. I still believe in the Eagles and think they have some legs to them. I think they're going to be the long-distance runners. We saw what happened last year at 4-6, the loss in New Orleans. Everybody said, all right, write them off, they're done. They ended up being one of the more dangerous teams. They had the Saints on the ropes, could have taken another step in the playoffs. So way too early to say that Carson Wentz can't reach that level. But obviously they got some digging to do, and they got a little bit of work ahead of them there.
He is Eric Edholm. Follow him on Twitter at Eric_Edholm for all of your college football, NFL coverage, NFL draft, Yahoo Sports. He's at Notre Dame today. Eric, I hope you get to enjoy the game, and I appreciate you jumping on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.